We are live. So before we dive into the episode, we've been doing this thing where we ask a LLM for a question and then sort of present it at the beginning of the episode, and then we'll come back to it later. So Mitch, for you to start thinking about, but we'll come back to this in about 20 minutes. The question is, imagine it's 2035 and the Dean of Innovation role has been automated. What would an AI dean do that it is better than humans, and what would it hilariously mess up? And with that, we're going to dive into the episode. Well, welcome to this episode of Twinning Strategy. This is episode 96. We are so close, guys, to 100. It's amazing.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, Happy New Year. The episode's title is Adapting to AI, the Urgent Need for Innovation in Education. And we couldn't think of anybody better to bring on to talk about this than Mitch Lovett, who is the interim dean of the Simon Business School at the University of Rochester. And he has been doing, he and his colleagues have been doing amazing things with sort of thinking about business education and how AI is changing that and to use that in really unique ways. And so, Mitch, I'm going to just start off and ask you the same question we ask all our guests, which is, what's on your mind?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the podcast. Really excited to be here and to get to engage with you all today. So what's on my mind is the students behind the AI who are using it, who are coming to class already knowing some things, abusing it at times, and how we as educators can help them transform the world in the next period.
Yeah, I mean,
do you think this abuse question that you bring up, do you think the abuse is really a reflection of professors not knowing how to handle it, or really it's abuse by the students?
I use the word abuse, but I want to, there are clear cases where they're told not to use it in some situation. They use it, so like technically they're abusing it from a sense of like breaking academic integrity or honesty. But I use it sort of flippantly here, because I think one of the core things that is challenging right now in education is exactly what you're talking about, is how do we adapt what we do to this world with AI? And that's fundamental to what we have to think about today, I think, in the conversation.
So I have a question on that, Mitch, and that is, like, when we went to school, right, we were taught that knowledge is power, and the ability to process this knowledge and think is like a superpower, right? Then Google came, and knowledge has become less of a power than the ability to think still was a superpower. Now AI came, knowledge is no power, thinking is done for you by AI. How do you cope with it in the education system if the values are sort of crumbling in front of our very eyes?
Great question. So I want to say AI is changing everything, and that's not hype, I don't think. It like really is true. It's changing everything. And yet some of the most important things aren't changing. What employers want, the fundamentals aren't that different. They want people to be able to use AI skills, but they also want the same thing: critical thinkers who are adaptive problem solvers. They want people who have collaboration and influence skills, who can take those ideas that maybe they're developing and refining with AI and be able to implement them and create impact and value for organizations. Like that same basic thing, except replace AI with whatever other tools, Excel or databases, whatever else in the past. That isn't really changing. And so the thing is, AI can do a lot of the tasks that were underlying how we trained people to become competent in the ways that employers want them to be competent. And those competencies we still need to create to develop and help students develop. And the urgency is, how do we make sure that that whole education process is still working with AI kind of interceding at times?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, Mitch, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about, this is not the first time in human history that sort of our definition of sort of intellect and knowledge has changed, right? I mean, it used to be that intellectual people were really good at memorizing stuff, right? And then along came the printing press, and then along came writing, and people like, well, as if you could read stuff and remember it, sort of, and then it became, you know, printing press. So now it's like I don't have to necessarily remember it. I just need to know how to read and synthesize it. So just it's not like this hasn't happened before. I think what I see as unique is the speed at which it's happened. I mean, we've gone sort of cycles that lasted 1,000 years to cycles that last, a couple weeks. It feels like. So I think
Yeah.
one of the things I'm interested in hearing you talk about is, and one of the things I like about what you all have been doing at the Simon Business School is, you've basically embraced, like, we need to adapt. But really, in the end of the day, the important thing is that students need to become more adaptive coming out of it. If you basically say, hey, I'm going to teach you a bunch of tools and skills to use, by the end of their 2 years in business school, those probably aren't useful anymore. So it's that ability to adapt and learn. So I don't know, I'd be interested to hear, how are you taking on that really fast, cycle, as opposed to the tools themselves?
We've for a long time been focused on, I guess, what I would refer to as enduring frameworks, enduring skill sets. So the competencies are the core. Like, you got to be educating, not training. If you train just for this tool, for this particular thing, that's not going to get people where they want to be. At the same time, you got to do some training so that people can have that practice of application, which embeds those competencies into the real life, authentic outcomes. So, in some sense, what we're doing shouldn't change in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, but it has to change in how we get there. And that's been one of the early learnings. Like, at the beginning, we were kind of thinking, oh, we'll have exams at the end that are, that assure that they have the incentive to do this. Well, it turns out that's not enough in many cases. You need to have more incentives along the way so that students see the impact. That impact that they see also it's really helpful to have really authentic experience built into it, which is not how we've done a lot of education. And historically, we've used kind of more contrived settings where we can control things more carefully, and we know what it is they're learning, and they're making sure they're making progress along this path. Well, that doesn't show people why it's important in the same way. And so we're in some sense having to spend more time thinking about, that part of it. But you're right, connecting it to previous innovations. Like, this isn't the first time we've had changes like this, and there are models to think about that. But the pace of change is a huge problem. We can design a lesson, and within a couple days, that lesson is like, okay, well, do we still need that lesson? The fundamentals of what we're going to teach is over. We had a professor create a lesson about AI, and like overnight they announced some things, and the entire lesson was basically updated the next day. So that creates all kinds of challenges, but that's what we're about. That's what is exciting about education, is that we are always learning and researching and developing new ideas, and in some sense, that's what we have to continue to do to serve students.
And to some degree, you were saying that prior you were trying to understand, well, what's the information we are exposing them to, what's they're memorizing, right? So you had like a planned out, paced out KPIs, right? And now you have to operate against constantly changing KPIs.
Yeah, and so early on in one of our finance classes, I was talking to one of the professors, and he's like, "Well, I don't really have to worry about this too much because ChatGPT can't actually solve the problems that I give the students." It's like, okay. I mean, and this is we were joking about Yetis earlier. The first three letters, yet, is important. Not Yetis, but yet is important. It's like, yeah, they can't do it yet, but already just in 2 years since 2023, when we really started driving forward on this, it's able to do a lot of the things that it couldn't do. And that's just ChatGPT. I mean, some of the other tools are even more specialized. And there are some finance type problems in some areas where you need really specialized tools to solve these problems effectively and with high accuracy. But and we're finding more and more of the tasks. Like if you just took from 2022 a set of homework problems and exams, probably 80-90% of that ChatGPT could get a B plus or A minus on today.
Right.
And
Right.
so, well, what does that mean about what you are going to give students? Are you going to give them those same problems, or are you going to have to redesign? I mean, so those are kind of changing the whole way we think about assessment, and thinking about how do we create authentic assessments, not just create sort of more artificial constrained environments where they don't use AI in order to incentivize them.
So you
Blending
mentioned
that with the
before,
authentic.
you mentioned before that you're doing sort of less contrived business cases and more, I guess, organic would be the opposite of that. Is that changing the way? And my experience with business school, unlike Jeff, who actually went to the same school, mine was that my wife went to Babson, and they had a very strong practical element. My wife actually worked with a company called Vanu, which was started by the son of Bose, the Bose speaker, and she worked with them. There's this practical element. Is that changing? Are you doing more of that? Is the nature of those relationships with those companies changing because of the AI?
Yeah, so we're definitely continuing to lean into experiential learning, and I think
Yeah.
that's really important. So the practical component, that experiential part, is really important. And it's important not just to have the practical, but to have the sort of reflective practice. So you got to have the framework and the reflective practice, and that's like, you can't replace that with AI directly,
Yeah.
right? If you're going to internalize these lessons, you got to have the framework. You got to be able to have the ability to hold that framework in your mind and be
Mhm.
able to apply it in context, so you can see the value of the framework, how you're tweaking, how you're thinking about that application. And so the experiential learning, and we have a great group here that supports the experiential learning process. Every program has projects and practical components to it that support exactly that kind of learning.
Just
And
as a follow-up,
go
are your
ahead. Yeah.
students bringing AI into their projects? Like, in other words, with a
Oh yeah.
company that hasn't really understood it yet, and they're actually bringing it in?
Even more than that, our students go off on their internships, and when they're on their internships, their supervisor requires them to use AI, and then makes them present at the end of the internship about how they used AI, and you can imagine why, so that they can learn how to use AI, right? So, like, we train them to do it. They then go off and apply it with their frameworks and all the other stuff that they're learning as well. It's not just the AI skills. That's really important. You can't just teach the AI skills. It's not sufficient. You
Right.
need those other competencies we were talking about. But they apply all that, and then they're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we get this AI stuff, more broadly in the workforce? I heard one statistic from an alum, where their first year analysts, this is for some financial analyst type roles, they were performing at the same level as third year analysts.
Right.
And the fundamental reason was they're able to use AI to make themselves that much more productive. Well, I mean, normally the learning curve is just super steep for those roles. I mean, it's changing your ability to get things done and to perform at a high level.
And it's interesting as you're talking about this. My wife and I were having a conversation last night, because I was my wife and I have had this ongoing joke for as long as we've known each other. Well, I'll say, would I'll say, like, look at this thing on my arm. Do you think it's a medical issue or whatever? And she'll be like, I'm not a doctor or whatever. And I was like, so last night I was like, I took a picture of this thing and I uploaded it into ChatGPT, and it says it's not a problem. And I'm like, I'll still go to the dermatologist or whatever. But she was telling me this story about how this friend of hers who is a doctor was saying that they're sort of having a little bit of an issue now because the residents are all using AI, and so my wife asked, like, is the AI getting it right? And she was like, the doctor was like, most of the time it does, but she said, I have had some people where I've had to say, some residents are having to say, you're not allowed to use this because they're using it as a crutch. And so there's this, we're sort of in this weird moment where, like, there's no question that AI's ability to do some of these things that junior people do is going to that's going to happen. Like, it's going to take some of those roles, but, like, there's still a need to be, how do you train people to know when it's okay to use, when it's not, when do I need human intervention? So interested in hearing your thoughts on how do you train people who are going into the workforce, sort of at that MBA level, to do that when, frankly, the people above them are often much less savvy than they are about these tools.
Yeah, so I mean, without going into too much detail, the core is teaching people how to use it as a thought partner. And then, like, there's two really big things. One is recognizing it has a lot of expertise, the nature of how that expertise was obtained, so that its prediction function when you're asking it questions, the basis of that prediction function, so where it is likely to fall into troubles versus not. And then the other side is just making sure you also use it to check its own blind spots. And that sometimes people use other tools. Maybe they do an AI assisted search on just on Google or Bing or whatever, some other platform to do your consistency checking. But I'll give you an example. My wife used it for evaluating some sick cats that we were fostering cats, and she was checking about potential illness. She put in sort of the symptoms and asked whether or not this is what it looked like, and what is the problem, and it gave her an illness and described everything, and she was like, oh, okay, this makes sense. She checked with somebody else, says, oh yeah, we had that before, but there was another illness that it completely missed that has very similar symptoms. So it's got this level of expertise that it actually has, but you still have to work with it in a way that draws out the expertise that's there. And in many cases, you still need the expertise to be able to do that yourself.
And
so
I have a question on that, Mitch. With that, right, you did talk about how employers still value the ability to think and work in teams and deliver, but you need to teach that very concept that you just mentioned to the kids themselves, to the students, right? And they are saying, well, how do I know when it's right, what's wrong? But it seems to be thinking fine. And how do you tell them that it's still critically important for you to think and not outsource the thinking, but outsource knowledge or prediction? So that's what I'm wondering, like, how do you come up with these boundaries?
Yeah, and that's sort of where we started. It's the question is, how do you create the authentic experience of it not working, right? So that they can see the boundaries themselves. And the flip side is, how do you create the authentic experience where they see that the knowledge and expertise that they develop is creating value beyond what ChatGPT or whatever, Claude, whatever tool would generate on its own, or with their interaction with it, if they didn't have the expertise. So and this is really hard for novices. That's the biggest rub of this, is for novices, they can't see it because they don't have enough experience to recognize it's not okay. And we actually, on the assessment side, have the problem that, well, you can sort of do moderately well with one of these tools without knowing much at all. And the problem is, if you're looking for really well, you're not going to get it. And so you're stuck with sort of mediocrity.
I would also caution that we don't give human beings more credit than they're due who are out there doing the jobs, because sometimes they're also using crutches that are maybe not so obvious as AI, right? Like I always used to joke about, doctors having like 5 different diagnoses, for that, were pretty common, and the one that was like a catch-all when they didn't know, and that like the podiatrist, it's always something to do with your feet. And when it's the immunologist, it's your immune system or whatever. So I think there's an element of, we're just yes, there are problems, but we're also just shifting the problems around that we've had all along.
Well, how good does the answer need to be? Like for most things, you don't need it to be 95% there. 80%'s plenty. And the truth is, ChatGPT with working with a human, that's using it well as a thought partner is going to get you there, even if they don't have the expertise for many tasks. And so you have to be able to identify, and this is part of the training of using these tools, identifying where do you need that level of precision or that level of quality.
Like asking the question, is there an alternative diagnosis of this problem after, you gave me this, is there an alternative that you didn't mention? And it will probably come up with something, maybe not something useful, but maybe it is something useful. I wanted to ask a question because I feel like in the hype cycle, we are kind of coming down off of, say, the 2024 into mid 2025 fever dream about what AI was going to be able to do, and coming into the sort of second half of 2025 and 2026, we're coming into like, okay, it is really good and amazing capability, but it is not necessarily what the hype was claiming it was going to be, or at least not right now. And I wanted to ask your take on that statement, and how does that impact what you're seeing in your education process?
Yeah. So the challenge is what you think of as the hype. So let me answer. If you think of it as this is going to allow us to re-engineer a bunch of processes that we've been doing, kind of after it happens the hard way, after we re-engineer it, I don't think that's hype. But the real gains are not going to be replacing tasks that we do currently. It's going to be being able to redesign the way we do the work. And this is kind of talking with an alum about some of this. This alum works for a company that basically evaluates AI investments. And they said, look, when we're doing this, we're going around, we're looking at different kinds of AI investments companies are making and deciding whether to fund them. What we see is the ones that look like they're going to create value are ones where they're actually re-engineering stuff, not just replacing tasks. Like you can do some replacement, but you gotta there's a lot of work to do the replacement well if you're going to replace many of the tasks. I mean, there's productivity enhancement, personal productivity enhancement. That's straight chat. But the real promise, I think, is in this other part that it involves a lot of creativity. It involves really deeply thinking about problems in new ways, and how we serve customers or companies, how we do operational things more fundamentally than otherwise. And so those are where I think we're going to see some real gains. I mean, in admissions, we read across the U.S. millions of applications every year.
Yeah.
Of course, obviously ChatGPT can read these applications. We could do all kinds of stuff with this, but we have lots of limitations right now on privacy, confidentiality, data. Like we can't just open up a ChatGPT window and throw some applications at it. You've got to design that really carefully and thoughtfully about all the data flows and everything to make sure that you're doing it. You got to make sure you're not allowing it to read the gender or predict the gender, so that we're not doing things that would be not only illegal, but just not something we want to be doing. So there's various things that we got to really be careful about in those processes, and those are things we have to rethink, not just replace tasks.
Well, there are so many avenues that my brain is going that we could go, but I did promise about 20 minutes in we would go back to this question, and I don't know why, but today I decided I was going to use perplexity. So this was a perplexity question. But it said, imagine it's 2035 and the Dean of Innovation role has been automated. What would the AI Dean do that you'd quietly admit is better than humans, and what would it hilariously mess up? Was the last part.
So it would probably be able to find all kinds of nice interactions of classes and things that would be optimal on paper, and and I would probably quietly make, oh yeah, that would be a better class than the one we're offering,
Right.
or if we could do that rearrangement of all the curriculum, that'd be great. But there are a bunch of humans behind this that the change management of that, and the governance process of that might be a little bit harder to move quickly. And I think it would be really good at those kind of narrow refinements of things that we might gloss over. But from the text, it's not going to actually know the details of why it would or wouldn't work. And I think that's the piece that I think it would get wrong on the innovation side. It would really open our eyes to new possibilities, but people would need to get in there.
Yeah, I think that that's it. It's interesting to sort of how do you sort of recognize that, like, today, it was in some ways an unfair question, right? Because I think, I keep saying to people, like, we're finger painting with AI right now. We don't know like, the value of a hammer is not to bang in nails. The value of the hammer is, like, when used in conjunction with other tools, you can build a house, right? Like, and I think that's where we're a little bit stuck, with the AI piece. So I like, to your point about finding interactions and connections that we haven't had, but then also how do you make sure the human side of this, because you will still have some human somewhere in this loop who have to be brought along. I'm going to jump in with another question, because we actually have somebody asking questions in our comment section, and so I'm going to pick one of the questions that's in there that is probably something on everybody's minds. Like, as you think about sort of these new technologies, the question was, what new skills are essential for employees to work with AI? So, we've been talking about it a little bit, but I think it's a great question to sort of say, whether you're an employee in a company or you're or a student in a business school, what are the things that you must know in order to take advantage of this new technology?
Yeah, I didn't have a very tight appreciation of this part, but from the beginning, because I felt like, well, what could go wrong? But at this point, the privacy and confidentiality of data that you're working with, and understanding kind of the risks associated with that, is pretty important for you. And in particular, I think within a company, the companies provide some guidance on that for employees. Hopefully the answer isn't just don't use it, which some companies have gone with, but because the reason that's a problem is because employees are still going to use it. They're just not using it on your company products. So that, like, okay, how do you enforce what they're doing on their phone while you're during company time? So I think that's one of the really important things, and there's a skill around that, but it's mostly policy. And then the second most important thing is what we're talking about, like the thought partner. How do you be a thought partner with the kinds of applications that you're doing? Understanding use cases so that you can quickly see the way that you partner with this tool in each of those use cases to be most effective. Because there are kind of, like, ways of doing this. Like, if you're trying to benchmark against competitors, well, there's ways you want to interact with it to do that well. Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of time. If you're trying to diagnose something, there's ways to do that. Make sure that you don't get a biased answer by accident. So just understanding those kind of best use cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything that was like, probably because you're seeing students and their various projects, and obviously within the realm of what you can discuss, are you seeing anything that even though you're, like, dreaming big and understanding where AI is going, but that is completely unexpected, or just kind of like, oh wow, I hadn't even thought about it that way? Or is it more like, yeah, this is all kind of moving forward as I would have predicted?
I'm not sure as I would have predicted, but as each step I'm seeing, like, stuff like each next step isn't like, whoa, this is totally different than what I thought. It's sort of each increment is moving in kind of a direction you'd expect from the next
So you weren't
space.
blown away by the fact that you could make yourself a plastic toy in a plastic. No, just kidding. That was like a thing, right, last year. Like everybody was.
So early on, I saw some tools that were doing like the professor AI image, like literally my image could be AI, my voice
Yes.
copied, and the AI could produce the
Yeah.
the entire talk track, my motions, everything to match from scripts.
Yes.
And of course, if it's from a script, AI can create the script too. So very
Right.
early on, I had this sense like radical things are going to be happening pretty quickly. We haven't quite gotten that
Right.
far, but we're not far from some of that stuff. And you can do all that right now. It's just kind of costly. So no,
Costly and
not many people
risky.
are.
I will say the most frightening thing I saw on LinkedIn this week was that I think it was Boston Dynamic now has robots that can change their own batteries. So that was a little frightening. So anyway, but
Oh.
Elena, like,
Yes. I was going to ask you, Mitch. So you were referring to change management end of it, right? And that must be a conversation in your classrooms over and over. So, because I think it's becoming more and more important, right? Because people need to
Yeah.
think very differently. Instead of hiring people with many different potentials that they were important, right? The leadership potential and whatnot, the thinkers. Now we need to hire lifelong learners, period, right? And that, in on of itself is a change management. So how do you teach people change management in the program? How do you stress it? And how do you teach them to be lifelong learners and teachers? Because that's what they will have to be.
Yeah. Well, so I'll talk a little bit of this. So in our core course on AI that's focused on AI, Dan Keating teaches it. Fantastic instructor. Has been one of our key leaders in the AI initiative. He covers ideas around change management right there and talking about in the context of AI. What I'd say is the need for resiliency is higher today than ever. And the flip side of the change management is we need people to be able to be responsive to change in a positive, optimistic way. That's a competency we're thinking about. Like, okay, how do we build this even more into our curriculum? Because it's although we talk about it, it's not something that's that embedded yet. That's the yet word there again. But we need more of that.
Because
And
back
that
then it wasn't that important. Now it's becoming acutely more important.
the rate of the change is so fast. So one of the things that we are talking about like a lot right now is how do we make our students take an entrepreneurial mindset? Because the kind of rate of change is more like, we're starting up and we got to iterate at that pace and be comfortable with that kind of like loose structure about these things, the level of experimentation. One of our alums came and spoke, and she was talking about this, that like she had to embed that into her organization, that like she's working a big, complex corporate setting where there's lots of process but if you want to move with AI and really be able to take advantage of it, you got to instead have this entrepreneurial mindset. How do you balance these two mindsets in the same space? That's a big challenge. And so trying to build that mindset. So we're getting them more engaged in entrepreneurial type thinking and activity as a result of that. And that builds in an automatic sense of like resiliency. Well, you get a setback, you got to how do you keep pivoting and it's different though than your traditional business focus. Yeah.
Well, I think, it's interesting also, I think as you talk about that entrepreneurial mindset, I mean, it's not just in terms of like when they're within the company, but also just like, it's quite likely that people who have that entrepreneurial mindset and are willing to, try try something new or go off on their own, and whatever it is, are going to be more resilient because jobs are going to keep getting eliminated. People are going to be out of a job. So your ability to sort of adapt quickly is going to, and be entrepreneurial in your life is going to become even more important. And it's interesting because in some ways that may be a throwback to something that was true, sort of, early days of the Industrial Revolution or something.
I think of resiliency as if you have a framework for how you're doing, how you're approaching problems that can endure beyond that change, that helps a lot, right? When you're having to rebuild the entire way you think about things and approach problems, that's more challenging. So one of the goals is to create enduring frameworks and to create that kind of approach for people so that they can have this thing that carries them through. And the resiliency is just about this, it's just this project I was working on, or this thing that didn't work out, not the overall, problem solving approach that is already adaptable.
So, so I think the fact that the episode booted Jeff for a few seconds probably is informing us that maybe we should wrap it. No, it's Mitch. This has been fantastic conversation. We are over our half an hour sort of main body of the episode, and as I mentioned before we started, we like to go around at this point and have everyone leave our audience with one interesting thing. That can be anything that you think was interesting, either from or extending the conversation. We always make our guests go first. So
Yeah,
we'll start with you, Mitch. What's one thing you want to leave our audience with?
I want to say this is sort of building off of a point that Elena raised earlier, which is counter to education being less important because you have this sort of expert in your pocket with AI. It's even more important. And education is what we need to help support humans really creating more value through AI.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that, and Mitch. It's been so great to have you on. Before I give my my one thing, what is the best place if people want to reach out to you, connect with you? What's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, I'll paste into the chat my LinkedIn and my email.
Awesome. So I guess as you're doing that, I'll say my my one thing is to build on what you were just talking about, Mitch, was the that if you go back in human history, I always like to say, when in human history has a new technology ever led to fewer jobs? I mean, it's just never been true, right? Fire, there were no cooks before. I would say there's no cooks before fire, and before the wheel, there were no Uber drivers, right? So, in the end of the day, I think we're going to see this. I think what we're going to see is this massive proliferation of new types of jobs and new things that people are doing that nobody's even thought of before. But to your point, the question is not, will people have jobs, but will people who don't adapt to the new technology have jobs? And I think that's the key question that we need to solve. So with that comment, I will pass it over to Elena, and I'll see if I can get your info up on the screen.
So yeah, I will pick it right up right there. What I'd
You're
like.
muted somehow.
Oh,
Well, you're
me?
good.
Oh, I'm good. Okay. So what I would
Oh,
say is that you were bringing up, Mitch, that the true value of AI is not the optimization, but reimagining the workflows. I like that point very much. And I also like to think about all the resilience and change management that's needed to come with that notion. Because every day we need to measure up to the workflows being consistently reimagined and needing to adapt and learn.
Fantastic. So I'm going to build on what you said, Elena, because this was what I had written down as my one thing, was about this concept that the hype is only hype in the sense of just if you're replacing tasks and replacing what we're already doing, not in terms of but the hype is realistic or I guess it's not hype at that point when you're talking about changing the process. And I think that really is the crux of this, is what can we now do because we have these tools, and how do we shift? And I think that's going to be the interesting question over the next few years, is how are I mean, it's just like when the internet comes on board and we have no idea where it's going to go. I think we're in that kind of phase of this, is we just don't know. And for those of us who are old enough, we remember that there was certainly this hype phase in around 2000, like a lot of companies got wiped out, but came back, and obviously is still doing amazing. We were still doing amazing things with the internet. So awesome. So thank you so much, Mitch, for joining us. This was a fantastic conversation. Love to keep it going and hear how things are going with you at Rochester as time goes on.
Well, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun. I look forward to connecting.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, Mitch.